Africa may be home to the fastest growing economies on the planet, but also it has its problems. It has crumbling infrastructure, there have been many power cuts, and more recently this country, South Africa, has suffered from the terrible face of xenophobia.
There are those who see Africa as a lost cause. Corruption, lack of skills, rolling blackouts and uncompetitive industry are but a few of the challenges facing the continent. Then there are those who see through the clouds of misery to the opportunities that the world's fastest growing region has to offer. Brand South Africa, a government agency created to promote investment opportunities in the country, held a series of dialogues during the World Economic Forum on Africa to counter the negative perceptions holding back the continent's growth.
Because with challenges come opportunities. There are many good things that are happening in Africa. Look at South Africa for an example. As a government, we put our neck on the block in order to ensure that we create this enabling environment. In the next 3 years, we're going to be spending about 847 billion rand in infrastructure, in transport, in roads, in rail, in ICT, in energy, so that we can be able to ensure that this enabling environment is conducive for business to do its work. The South African economy, about 70% of it is in the hands of the private sector. So if we are to achieve our vision 2030 of the National Development Plan of putting 11 more million jobs into the economy, we require this partnership. That goes also with our Agenda 2063 of uniting Africa so that it becomes prosperous. So all those visions will not happen in 2030 or 2063. It must happen now, so that all those patriotic Africans must close ranks in order to ensure that we tell the good stories about Africa that must grow to create the jobs that are required, and also for businesses to thrive in our continent. So the opportunities are there. When you look at the Africa continent as a whole, the infrastructure program there under the Presidential Infrastructure Coordinating Initiative, which our President Zuma has been asked by his colleagues, heads of state, to champion, we can see that at the end of the tunnel there is light.
Aside from that, I mean, we understand that there's a tremendous will amongst all, as you say, patriotic Africans to make these things happen. How difficult is it sometimes, though, selling the image overseas? I mean, you travel a lot as a minister. Some of the problems that we have here, you know, power shortages, labour unrest, xenophobic violence, even in this country alone in the last few months. How difficult is it to sell people that story?
Well, we need to make all efforts to ensure that we sell those good stories, but also not to hide the challenges that we face. For example, the challenges that we face in South Africa on energy. But the good thing is that there is a plan that is being put on the table in order to ensure that we have the energy mix in our country, in South Africa, but not only in South Africa, but in the whole of the African continent. There's a big project going on in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the Grand Inga, for which South Africa is a participant. If that project can come on stream, it can not only provide solution for the energy needs of the Democratic Republic of Congo and the whole of the Southern African region, but it can lighten the whole of the African continent. So the key issue now is for African governments to work together under this Agenda 2063 so that we can be able to ensure that all those plans must be translated into practical steps and actions to be implemented not in 2030, not in 2063, but now in 2015.
And the infrastructure plans, you said more than 800 billion
yes.
rand in infrastructure. Do you ever get the feeling as the state that sometimes it's not even touching the sides? There's so much more that needs to be spent across this entire continent.
Well, we have to start somewhere. Here in South Africa, we've already started in terms of this infrastructure outlay, but not only confining ourselves into South Africa, but also we're interacting with our neighbors. The Maputo Development Corridor also has opened up trade between South Africa, Swaziland, and Mozambique. There are also strides that we are making in order to ensure that we have one border facility in Beitbridge between South Africa and Zimbabwe. All these initiatives indicate that if we work together in a collaborating fashion, these regional economic integration can also assist in bringing about this united Africa, so that we can be able to ensure that goods and services and people can be able to move freely across the African continent.
And I reported on a story probably nearly 20 years ago, perhaps I'm showing my age, but essentially there was talk of a single currency at the former Organization of African Unity in the Harare summit there. Are these dreams, or are they really going to happen in the future?
They say if you can dream it, you can achieve it. So I hope that when we have this free trade area, we already have the African Parliament here in South Africa in Centurion, we can be able to move towards this unitary state that we also want to see in Africa. So it will come step by step, block by block.
Last but not least, a lot of entrepreneurs on the continent say that they wish that government perhaps could move out of business more and retreat and allow entrepreneurs to create wealth and create jobs. Well, what do you say to that as a Minister of the State?
Well, my view is that it's a partnership. There's a role for government, especially in creating the enabling environment, building public infrastructure such as roads, opening the air, ensuring that there's information revolution. But the primary task of creating jobs is for the private sector. If you look at our country as a whole, as I've indicated, about 70% of our economy is in the hands of the private sector. So that partnership is required between government and business, and also with organized labor and communities. But the role of entrepreneurs is so important, because entrepreneurship, we need to inspire our young people that they should not always aspire to get jobs, but they must aspire to be job creators themselves.
South Africa's image has taken fire in recent years, with labour unrest, ill governance and economic downgrades plaguing the country. Yet South Africa still attracts over $10 billion in foreign direct investment and is the 13th most attractive FDI destination globally, according to A.T. Kearney, a global management consulting firm.
In managing the reputation of the country and the brand and the image of the country, we get input from various stakeholders. So in the issue of the attacks on foreign nationals, of course it touches on a whole lot of aspects. So in listening and trying to find out what is the reason, what is the root cause, then a lot of stakeholders get involved, whether it is Home Affairs, or the small business development, as it were. But I think this was just a position, or a situation rather, that called all South Africans to rally behind the nation brand and say, this is not who we are, and why is this happening on our watch? You know, why is this happening now? And there has been a collective effort in trying to root it out and to make sure that it doesn't happen.
What kind of reactions are you getting around the world at the moment when you're on your travels telling this story?
The reactions that we have been getting are a little bit on the energy issue, but it's not really the questions that have been raised. Issues are, what is the plan moving forward? Many of them have said this is what we see across many countries that we invest in. Others don't have energy at all. Others have different challenges around energy, but give us the comfort that there is a plan of action and what are the timelines, you know. So that is the one thing that gets raised. But then investors would also talk about the perception of hard labor conditions in South Africa. Whenever there's a strike, it's probably not defined time-wise, and it goes through extended periods. Those are the issues that they raise.
And as an African, I mean, how close to your heart is this whole exercise?
Oh, this is core to my heart. It is so close to my heart. You know, I think it's important that as self-determination, that we tell our story, that we articulate what is it that we want the world to see us as, as a continent. But for us also to believe in that message, to believe in that story, that we are a prosperous continent, that we are a forgiving people, that we are a tolerant people, we are hardworking, we are determined, we are inspirational. You know, we go beyond any challenges to find solutions.
What do you think is the biggest selling point that this country's got?
I think we've gone through different phases. The biggest selling point has been the people, the warmth. But then when you talk to different segments of the communities, of the various communities, the investors are quite happy about the infrastructure that we have. And they're saying they're able to come in, plug in, and are able to do business. The banks are secure. The legal framework is you know, definite, and they kind of relish that. You know, so you find that it's more encouraging to listen to what other people have a view on us. Whereas then you hear pockets where people will say, but your own people say this or that, which is a bit unfortunate, and which is some of the work that we are trying to work on currently at Brand South Africa, to engage with South African business people who would be doing business outside South Africa, to say, how do we have one unified messaging that begins to say, South Africa is open for business, there is infrastructure in South Africa, yes, there are challenges, what are the challenges and how are we addressing them? But we tend to be harder on ourselves than the world out there. Many other countries would say they are fighting for survival, you know, where our issues about governance, transparency, crime, and says those are nice problems to have, because then it says it's an active society, it's an active economy, and there's all of that that is vibrant, that is happening. Whereas in their areas and regions, it's about, am I going to have a roof over my head today? Am I going to be bombed? Am I going to have citizenry, or do I have to cross a border to find refuge? You know, so it's those kind of challenges that are different when you engage with other people.
And lastly, I mean, perhaps it's a good time to take stock of what's happened in this country. I mean, if you remember the difficult days before the first elections in '94,
yes,
people were talking quite seriously about the possibility of a civil war in this country. And look, 21 years later,
yes,
this country's got its problems, but it's a growing, thriving place. I mean, how does that make you feel?
It's really a pride to have lived through and experienced that. And we say, you know, the payoff line for Brand South Africa is inspiring new ways. We were then a rainbow nation. We were alive with possibility. But we've gone beyond possibility. We know it's real, it's happening. And any challenge, we lock horns and we find solutions. So in many ways, we inspire other nations. We inspire ourselves to, you know, to do better, to do more. So it's really, really encouraging. I think the future generation is going to inherit a South Africa that is going to be a bright and a prosperous one.
Coming up after the break, CNBC Africa explores how Brand South Africa develops its global investment strategy. Stay with us. Brand South Africa conducts extensive research to enhance its global marketing strategy. Research manager Petrus de Kock has a deep understanding of the perceptions that investors from China, India and Brazil have of South Africa. But when it comes to opinions from neighbouring African countries, such information is not well known.
And what we launched last year, we call it the SA Incorporated Research Project, where I work with our colleague who's our Africa and Middle East manager. Last year we did fieldwork in Kenya, Ghana and Nigeria. And the concept of the project is, you know, as a country that's only been really engaging on the continent for 21 years, post-94, there's been a proverbial explosion of South African business across the continent. former Minister of Finance, Pravin Gordhan, in 2013, he said between 2008 and 2013, the Reserve Bank approved more than 1,000 investment projects on the continent. If you look at EY, the Ernst & Young Africa Attractiveness Survey, South Africa is the third largest investor on the continent by number of projects. So from a nation brand perspective, the question we then started asking ourselves, are we doing enough to profile and support the South African image across the continent? So we started digging into these fieldwork projects to understand in specific markets where are the perception, reputation challenges, where are the opportunities, and we came across some phenomenal findings in that process last year.
What did you find?
You know, for example, Kenya. You know, if you look at Kenya, I think Kenya has been a very difficult market for some South African corporates to access for a variety of reasons. But one of the things that we came across there is that Kenyans are very diplomatic, very soft-spoken, highly educated, very efficient people. South Africans, through the fieldwork, are perceived in Kenya as being slightly imposing, a bit aggressive, you know, in their decision-making and wanting certain things. So we took a big lesson from that, you know, and in that, the reputation of the country is shaped by corporate engagement, by the engagement between individuals. So the emphasis that we are starting to place on our reputation work is what can we as individual South Africans or corporates do to build the image and the reputation of the country. That's a very big lesson. The other very surprising finding that we got is the appeal of South African music. You know, we kind of knew going into the project, you know, that South African music is big on the continent, but in as much as there's criticism of South Africa in Kenya, the moment you start talking entertainment, music, even comedians, you know, people's faces light up. And we learned from there that to manage the reputation of the country, build the brand, we must also look at the soft issues, the culture, the music. How do we build a deeper understanding via those kind of channels of interaction? So it's a very dynamic project, you know, where we're constantly open to what are the criticisms, where are we weak, where do we need to do work, but also looking at where are the opportunities to grow and deepen relations.
And in your research, I mean, there's a lot of things that people don't quite understand about this continent. I mean, people don't realize that it's one of the fastest growing economic continents on Earth. But in your research, what would be like 3 things that you've found out in your research that you would say would encourage investors?
You know, I think one thing that has definitely changed fundamentally on the continent is, I think, a very strong intervention from African governments to deal with their business environments. You know, for example, if you look at, if the continent is the second fastest growing region in the world, if we have 7 of the world's fastest growing economies on this continent, it cannot be for a lack of relevant policy. It cannot be for a lack of a certain level of management, you know, of that. So I think from a governance perspective, the message of the high levels of economic growth is that there's proper, in certain instances, governance systems. It may not be ideal, it may need to be developed much further. So I think at a governance level, you know, we must be taking some lessons from the continent, that high levels of growth are also connected to what's happening in the political and the governance realm. I think something else that people must also understand is the revolutionary change in our class structures on the continent. And I think that is something in Kenya, in Nigeria, in Ghana, even in South Africa. The growth of middle classes, the slow improvement in levels of human development. I think all of those are contributing factors that makes the outlook for the continent much more positive. I think something else also that we kind of lose sight of, you know, if you think of the principles on which the African Union operates sometimes, you know, it's like things like not accepting unconstitutional changes of government, not accepting certain kinds of behaviors across the continent. That also sends a very strong message, you know. It still happens. We still have instances, you know, where things go wrong, you know. However, I think the continental approach has evolved to a point where we have certain agreed to principles that we all live up to. And all of that adds to the bigger picture of potential stability and growth.
Africa is the final frontier for high-growth markets where the great challenges present even greater opportunities to develop untapped sectors and uplift those trapped in poverty.
Well, Africa is certainly the most exciting place to be. That's the most attractive place, and that's why everybody is looking here. They're looking here because you've got a continent of over 1 billion people. You've got a continent that's growing at 5 to 6%, and that's 3 to 4 better than any other part of the world. They are looking here because we've got the resources, we've got and we've got the talent. So it's an excellent opportunity. Of course, there are challenges.
There must be a lot of challenges. I mean, some of the problems in the last few years or so with the power problems here in this country, xenophobic attacks, also unrest, crumbling infrastructure in many places. How do you sell that to people?
Well, what we need to focus on inside in the continent, first we need to do two things. We need to ensure that the people we put in power, the people that we elect to positions of leadership, are delivering on the promises they make during elections. That's the first and important thing. It means that we as Africans, African citizens, we need to ensure that we demand what is right for us and what we voted for. I don't think as Africans in general we do that. I think we are still quote unquote groupies of the people that we bring in power, instead of looking at them and say, you work for me. Because when we put them in power, we start idolizing them, we start glorifying them, instead of now holding them to account. That's the first thing we need to do. The second thing, of course, that we need to do is we need to invest in the right things. And without energy in the continent, we're not going to be able to do to move this continent any further, because the continent will remember a dark continent. We need the energy, not just figuratively, not just literally to light up the continent, but also figuratively to bring energy to the continent. That's an important thing. We need to invest in the infrastructure. But the things to me that matter mostly is, as a continent, we need to have a collective vision. We have that with 2063, bringing peace and prosperity to a continent. But what we don't have, I don't think we've got the right focus in terms of ensuring that we implement the things we talk about. We are great at getting around the table and talking about what works, but we're not so excellent at putting it in practice. So we need to do that, most importantly. Some of the key things that we need to do coming out of that vision of 2063 is we need to work together as a continent. We're a continent that, if you look at our intra-Africa trade, we are only at 12 to 15% intra-Africa. You look at Europe at 70%. We are not doing well. If we cannot invest in our own continent with our own people, we are not going to move this continent further. You look at the business of brands. You look at our brand, Africa 100, the list of the top 100 most valuable brands in Africa. 80% of those brands are non-African. What that means to me is that 80% of our agenda is outsourced.
Everyone's talking for a long, long time now about how to get the youth of this continent to work. It's either an opportunity or it's a ticking time bomb. You'll have millions of people, the biggest young population on the planet, who will realize what they're missing out on. How do you think this continent should get people back to work?
Well, you're right. That is, everybody loves to talk about the youth dividend. That 70% of the continent is under the age of 30, but over 50% of them are unemployed. And that's the problem. I think to get the youth working, don't find them jobs. Create an enabling environment for them to create jobs. Give them opportunities on two areas. One, we need to ensure that the type of education that we create in Africa and that we deliver and provide in Africa is an education which enable productivity, which enable these young people to be able to go out there and create ideas that work. Secondarily, we need to invest in entrepreneurship. We need to make sure that these young men and women in Africa are given the right tools and resources to create the brands and the products and the services which serve African needs, which are designed to respond to the conditions of the continent. Because in doing so, we will get more brands like M-Pesa, we'll get more brands like MTN, we'll get brands which are created in Africa to respond to the needs of Africa. That's the way to get the youth working. Don't give them grants, give them, empower them, give them the skills, enable them, create a market for them, and buy made in Africa.
And how likely is it you think there will be the political will one day to make this happen?
I always say that the challenge with us Africans is we are always looking to the politicians to deliver us. We just need the politicians to do their job. We need to do ours. We as Africans need to go out into the world and create the future world that we want. We need to go against the lethargy of the leaders and show them the energy of the African spirit.
And looking ahead to the future, how do you see it panning out now, the image of this continent, which has taken a few knocks in recent years, but looking ahead, what do you see?
There seems to be an energy and a movement towards delivering on the 2063 vision of peace and prosperity in the continent. There's greater talk about integration. There's greater movement towards ensuring that it is not just theory, but it is actually action. I think we're looking at an exciting future for Africa. I always like to say, as some of my friends have always reminded me, that Africa has got a future and Europe has got a past.
And what do you think about what Kwame Nkrumah said, was it not, who said, I wasn't born in Africa, Africa was born in me? Was it not him who said that?
It's Kwame Nkrumah. He said, I'm not an African because I was born in Africa. I'm an African because Africa was born in me. But to me, it all starts with a singer, Fela Kuti from Nigeria, who said, you must identify with Africa, then you'll have an identity. Because that identity is what is going to inspire African excellence.
Brand South Africa's vision to build an integrated, prosperous and peaceful Africa presents a new phase for Africans to act as the catalyst spurring inclusive economic growth. While the challenges may seem insurmountable, the continent can ill afford to let its divisive past threaten its united future.
WEF Africa has tried to reimagine Africa's possibilities. Surely the possibilities are endless, but it's a very long road and there's a lot of hard work to be done. From me, Chris Bishop at the Cape Town International Convention Centre, it's goodbye.